New evidence about cause of obesity. Video is based on extract from Obesity Code book. You have to look at calorie output as well as calorie intake to understand obesity. People often intuitively believe that weight loss is all about how much you eat. Reduce your calorie intake, the thinking goes, and your weight will also decrease. Sounds pretty plausible, right? Well, there's a problem, it's just not true. In fact, there's no causal relationship between calorie intake and obesity. According to the Mortality and Morbidity Report by Drs. J.D. Wright and J. Kennedy published in 2004, calorie consumption in the United States increased by an average of 250 calories per person per day between 1971 and 2000. But that wasn't what was causing obesity in the country. According to Lederbaum's data, average calorie intake didn't rise between 1990 and 2010. Obesity, meanwhile, continued to increase by 0.37% each year. So what's going on here? Well, reducing your overall calorie intake isn't enough on its own to help you lose weight. The reason for that is simple: body weight isn't only determined by how many calories you're consuming, it's also about how many you're burning. Calorie output, in other words, is just as important. That leads us to another misconception, the idea that the calories we consume are automatically converted into fat. This simply isn't backed up by the data. In reality, calories are used for all sorts of things, from producing heat, proteins, bone and muscle tissue to fueling your brain and increasing the volume and rate of your heartbeat. Obesity, then, isn't a problem caused by eating too much, it's an energy usage problem. Some people's bodies convert calories into fat while others will simply develop bigger bones and muscles or use that energy to boost their concentration. And here's the thing, it's only the first use of calories that's regarded as socially problematic. Reducing calorie intake reduces energy expenditure and lowers the metabolic rate. What would happen if you suddenly reduced your calorie intake while continuing to expend the same amount of energy? Well, you'd die. That's why your body reduces its overall energy expenditure when you eat less. We've known that for a while now. Take a classic study conducted in 1919 at the Carnegie Institute in Washington, D.C. Participants were put on a strict diet and consumed between 1,400 and 2,100 calories a day, a reduction of around 30% compared to their usual diets. The result? The participants' energy expenditure also fell. It decreased by roughly 30%, falling from 3,000 to 1,960 calories per day. Their new diet didn't result in any significant weight loss, it just decreased the amount of energy their bodies were expending. One way bodies reduce energy expenditure is to cut their metabolic rates, leading to all sorts of adverse effects on other bodily functions. That was shown in research conducted by Ansel Keys, a Minnesota-based doctor, in 1945. Keys was interested in starvation. To observe its effects, he radically reduced his subjects' calorie intake. That sensation was caused by the fact that their metabolic rate, which, among other things, regulates body temperature, had declined by 40%. Their heartbeat had also slowed dramatically, dropping from 54 beats a minute to just 34. Their brain activity meanwhile showed signs of serious impairment, accounting for their lethargy and inability to concentrate. This just goes to show that cutting down on calories isn't a viable solution to weight issues. High insulin levels are the real cause of obesity, though the exact way this works remains unclear. Putting on weight is easy. Contrary to popular belief, the most effective way at piling on the pounds isn't binge eating. If you really want to gain weight rapidly, all you have to do is inject yourself with a hormone which your body already produces, insulin. And it's insulin, or rather increased insulin levels and associated hormonal imbalances, that are the main cause of obesity. That's something L.C. Kong showed in a 2013 study. According to Kong's research, some 75% of all successful weight loss efforts can be directly attributed to reduced insulin levels. Kong also showed that drugs which raise people's insulin levels result in weight gains, while drugs which have the opposite effect cause weight loss. It's these regulatory substances which determine how you feel. The hormone ghrelin, for example, makes you feel hungry. Leptin, by contrast, tells you when you've had enough to eat. And that's where insulin comes in. Once the amount of insulin in your system rises above a certain level, your hormonal balance is disturbed, leading to behavior such as overeating. Robert Lustig, an endocrinologist and obesity expert based in California, suggested in 2004 that insulin inhibits the normal functioning of leptin. That's a pretty plausible theory. Here's how it works. Leptin levels, Lustig argued, increase after a meal. That tells your brain that you've had enough to eat. The same goes for when you've recently put on weight, and your body fat increases. The leptin in your body suppresses your appetite and encourages weight loss. When you look at obese patients, however, you often find the opposite is happening. Their leptin levels decrease after meals, meaning that the feeling of satiety, the sense of being full, eludes them. The absence of this natural feedback mechanism means that they continue eating. But even as their body fat levels increase, their leptin levels remain low. Snacking between meals leads to higher insulin levels and can cause insulin resistance. Oprah Winfrey has had a very public battle with weight loss. After losing more than 60 pounds in 1988, she started gaining weight again. Since then, she's experienced something familiar to anyone who's tried out various diets at some point, an endless cycle of losing and regaining weight. So what makes dieting so hard? Well, it seems that high insulin levels are to blame. Eventually, that leads to insulin resistance. But before we get to that, let's take a closer look at insulin itself. Insulin is basically a hormone responsible for removing sugar from your bloodstream and depositing it in your body's cells, thus regulating your blood sugar levels. When you eat carbohydrates and sugars, the body produces extra insulin to deal with those incoming sugars. When that happens, your cells eventually become insulin resistant. That essentially means cells become unresponsive to insulin hormone receptors and stop taking in sugar molecules from your blood. As a result, insulin-resistant people have a much harder time losing weight. Their cells only receive a small portion of the sugars they've consumed and constantly cry out for more food, resulting in weight gain. That's also the reason even successful diets ultimately prove unsustainable. Most people eventually give in to their body's demands to be fed. One of the chief causes of raised insulin levels is snacking between meals. Why? Well, each small snack leads to a peak in insulin production. If you're always grazing between mealtimes, your body will constantly be producing medium to high levels of insulin. That's a problem. Ideally, your body should have regular periods of low insulin levels. But that's only possible if you fast for around 4 to 5 hours after a meal and give your body a chance to reduce that spike in insulin production before your next meal. Well, each small snack leads to a peak in insulin production. If you're always grazing between mealtimes, your body will constantly be producing medium to high levels of insulin. That's a problem. Ideally, your body should have regular periods of low insulin levels. But that's only possible if you fast for around 4 to 5 hours after a meal and give your body a chance to reduce that spike in insulin production before your next meal.